Hello, this is Jim Schaefer, executive producer and host of Rip Rap, the academic book television program. My guest today is Randy Baier, and we're going to again observe our ritual of discussing various books Rip Rap has received, but that we couldn't arrange an interview for a program for one reason or another. Welcome to Rip Rap, Randy.
Thank you, Jim. I'm glad to be back.
And we have our usual variety, and one of them is an interesting book. We try to keep the program timely, and so it's only for that reason that we couldn't use this first book, which is Hands Across Michigan, Tradition Bearers. A fantastic book, but the only problem is it's about 13 years old, even though I just ran across it. It's about craftspeople in Michigan. Wonderful look at people doing all kinds of crafts, including the Native American. And I thought, this is fantastic. It's also not really a scholarly study.
There's such a broad range, but just the names of people really give you some perspective on the sort of ethnicities and sort of life histories of people that are represented by Michigan or in Michigan. There's syrup makers, piñata makers, musicians, calligraphers, all walks of creative life.
Well, and I think it acts more as a primary source for research, but it is something that people are becoming, quite deeply interested in, is the customs and the rituals and the traditions that are here. And it's one of a book that has a lot more depth than what I've seen before. It's not oriented toward crafts exactly, it's looking at the doing of things, crafts as a way of life, and so it has a much deeper meaningfulness in it.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's
as an expression of tradition.
Right. It also has a breadth in terms of generations. It's very well done.
Well, yeah, in terms of in just age, if this is a 14-year-old book, here's a portrait of Harriet Shedowin, a black basket maker. So she would be in her 80s now. I'm sorry, the book must be older because she says here she passed away in 1991.
Well, the research and the compilation of the book also reaches back for 10 years before the book was published.
Right.
But it also shows
Very
how
nice.
books and writing can help preserve the record of what's going on. So yes, some of the people they've interviewed for this project have now passed on. So that makes it even more valuable. But it's quite I guess the word would be authentic record at a very deep level of what's going on.
Yeah.
And that just fascinated me. I've not seen that much. I mean, there's just simple recordings of very idiosyncratic things, but this is really quite carefully done.
Yeah. Yeah, in a sense it's the tip of the iceberg. It's a hint that each of these 3-page entries or 5-page entries represent a living tradition. I mean,
Right.
there's a community of practitioners there that each of these people is, representing.
I just loved it. I thought it was really great. And the whole title of the Tradition Bearers takes it into a different dimension.
Right.
This one, when I first picked it up, well, you've got a deeper appreciation for this kind of the buried book. I liked it because it was the sense of narrative. And this is a narrative that goes back some 2,000 or 3,000 years.
Yeah, yeah.
And they talk about this. I mean, it fascinated me because it shows how scholarly material can be fascinating. This reads like a novel. So it's how this manuscript got lost and then found and
found
lost again. And it involves some,
Right, a little bit of intrigue or whatever.
I guess that was what I was trying to get at.
Well, this is the buried book, The Loss and Rediscovery of the Great Epic of Gilgamesh, David Damrosch. And I mean, I particularly like the Gilgamesh story, and also I've had the chance to teach it in the community college, just in basic humanities course. So I've seen several of the translations, and it seems like about every 5 years a new translation of Gilgamesh will come out, sometimes in prose form, sometimes in poetic form. But this book is really intriguing because it sort of retraces a story that goes back into the 1800s, the British Empire and whatever, the sort of great age of Orientalist research and whatnot. And then sort of the uncovering of the cuneiform tablets and just the story itself. It's just quite, it sort of has that quality of uncovering something in old libraries and this and that, but it's also a very modern book.
And a strategy isn't to redo the translation, but to look at the story as a narrative, and that makes it just wonderful, to show how this is stretched over thousands of years, and it really does have all the elements of mystery and intrigue, even some violence, and how all this came about, but also about how it kept surfacing. You know, somebody would run across it, so it'd come back up to the surface again.
You know, the nice metaphor here is that one of the core things in Gilgamesh is the fact that Gilgamesh has a challenge to stay awake, and he's trying not to go to sleep. And if he can stay awake, he becomes, you know, he achieves some kind of immortality. And of course, he does fall asleep.
That's what's so fascinating about it. The narrative is about being silent and falling away from conscious awareness and then coming back to it. And the actual text in the book does the same thing.
Yeah, good. I'm glad that this is out. Puts a perspective on the epic itself.
Yeah.
And it really is the oldest epic in the you know, the
This
tradition.
next one is with Jeremy Green, Drugs and the Definition of Disease, Prescribing by the Numbers. It's something of huge concern to me. The author concentrates more on diseases like diabetes, but still the paradigm is there, that now, because of the volume of patients and the complexity of all these different diseases and the complexity of the medications, doctors are using a system of profiling. He argues that there are some situations that are asymptomatic. You can't tell what's going on. That's what he means when he refers to the notion of prescribing by the numbers. If you have this level of blood pressure and this set of symptoms and these kinds of situations, then you ought to have a specific kind of medication. But your condition's asymptomatic. The patient's not quite there showing definitive symptoms, but you can see quite readily how this could get into a possible abuse.
Any epidemiologist has to work with numbers, but at the same time prescribing based on what are the odds, you know, or the norms, is ignoring the fact that every case really is an individual situation.
What always bothers me is the anomaly. You know, if there's something that doesn't quite fit that profile.
That's where the profile gets questioned.
The profile is built on norms. The norms have built-in standards as to what's regarded as acceptable. And you have to be absolutely aware of what those parameters are, or real damage can happen.
Now next, Nemesis, The Last Days of the American Republic by Chalmers Johnson, published by Metropolitan Books.
Yeah.
Also, Chalmers Johnson is the author of The Sorrows of Empire and Blowback.
This guy, Chalmers Johnson, who's the author of the book Nemesis, The Last Days of the American Republic, kind of takes it to the edge. I mean, we're in this era now of speculation about what is the United States doing in Iraq, what do we think we're going to do in Iran, and so he's quite provocative in this book. It's almost like you feel that he's the one who's saying the things that have come to be forbidden to say, but needed to be said. And the thing about him is that, well, he's not exactly a scholar. He's the president of the Japan Policy Research Institute, but he's probably better known as a commentator to some national and international publications like the Los Angeles Times and the London Review of Books, and that kind of thing. He was in a prize-winning documentary, Why We Fight. So it's one of these things. The guy is kind of in this in-between thing as far as scholarly stuff.
Yeah.
Now this is a thing just in 2005.
Ah, okay, because it might be it's an interesting play on words there, because that was done.
Well, this is the guy, Chalmers Johnson's guy, that wrote the book on the CIA's clandestine activities abroad, the book that's called Blowback. And in his other book, he explored how the growth of American militarism has actually jeopardized our safety, And now in this book, Nemesis, which is the final volume
Sort
of
of
what
a trilogy.
yeah, blowback
right,
trilogy.
right.
He shows how imperial overstretch is undermining the republic itself, both economically and politically. And I could get an
Right,
interview
I'm
with
sure
him.
he'll be criticized for being a doomsday whistleblower, whatever, you know, a naysayer. But it is something that one has to look at in terms of, you know, global politics and the overstretching of
I love that,
the
the
United
concept
States.
of overstretching. And if you look at all the previous empires, there was always this moment as the empire was coming to an end where it got stretched out too far and was under pressure to stretch even more to protect itself from the barbarians at the gate. And yet its resources are becoming limited and
yes,
essentially is bankrupt, and the leadership is so corrupt that they're caught in this nemesis between, okay, let's see, we need to do this, but we don't have the money to do it, so then they get caught in these kinds of events. Where, as we now are in the United States, we're trying to send people to protect our interests, our wide-flung interests, but we don't have the money to support it.
and thinking that others, I think mistakenly that others in this day and age, allies, are
Will
with
help
you.
out. Yeah,
along the
that
way,
will help
and
out.
they're not.
No, and they're bowing out, saying, well, excuse me, I'm exiting stage left. But I like the second part of the title, The Last Days of the American Republic. I love that evocative kind of thing. I love that evocative kind of thing. This one, Dancing in the Streets, A History of Collective Joy by Barbara Ehrenreich. She's the one who wrote the book Nickel and Dimed and her other book, Bait and Switch. I love the title.
But she's a psychologist, isn't she, Barbara Ehrenreich?
I think so. She's arguing that in terms of history and anthropology, the origins of communal revelry, she's looking at what is fun, how far do you go when you're having fun, and it can be profound because the Greeks worshipped Dionysus and the goat, which were all evoked in the beginnings of Greek tragedy and Greek comedy. But there were also penalties, prices to be paid for all that. Right now we're close to celebrating Mardi Gras and going into Lent, and that's also the Carnival, which was supposed to be this completely unleashed fun time of celebration. And then she starts talking about other religions, such as the Muslims, battling certain kinds of aesthetic Sufism. So there's this dimension of reality that dancing in the streets may be such a release and such a source of ecstasy that the experience may take us far beyond what we actually consider joyful.
Government or orderly rules or just rules of society. There's another layer of collective understanding that the people themselves, you know, a people themselves will bring out. I mean, people want to rejoice.
There is that way of taking it into a way that can't be governed. You know, the joy that exceeds the rules.
In collective action, you're kind of safe from, in a certain way, safe from individual retribution if you're doing something which is, you know, against the rules or
you're the jokester in the court. You're
Yeah,
the one that
yeah.
can't be penalized because
Right.
that's your job
Yeah.
to be the jokester.
Yeah.
This next one, Piero di Cosimo by Dennis Geronimus, is just fantastic. This is by Yale University Press, and they do just a stupendous work like this. This is the legendary coffee table-sized book that's also a scholarly study. And this one's on Florentine art in Italy. And it's just an absolutely magnificent study. And what he's done is to take one lesser-known artist in Florentine art and do a wonderful study of it. I mean, with four color art throughout, with all the plates all superbly done.
Well, what's interesting is he's making some links here to 20th century art as well, between the sort of the visions of the fantastic that have actually continued through, or the sublime or whatever that have continued through. I'm just reflecting on some of the comparative artworks that he's finding to sort of express some of the ideas that are in Cosimo's work. through through greater artists of the
Well, a good
artists of the
writer will
20th
do
century.
that. He'll be looking not only at the specific instance, but connecting to the context.
Seems to be looking at dream, at fantasy, at all kinds of, as you said, revels. Also, really interesting point in history where sort of the known world was, the pre-age of exploration, but a lot of elements in that Mediterranean culture of from Asia, from the Middle East, from Turkey, from Egypt, and as far away as China, certainly Africa. And so all of this is sort of wrapped into the visual iconography.
What also fascinates me is that an artist who may have been one of the lesser known in his own era, when you fast forward to a different era where there are different sensibilities, a different aesthetic, this artist has a higher value or is given more recognition.
Yeah, that's true, because I think that in comparing it to sort of paintings from the Surrealism period or paintings from the French poets, the symbolist poets, it really is true. Those
lens.
values look
Yeah.
back at a different lens entirely.
Yeah. And what was great was how Geronimus, the author of the book, explores this all very consciously, deliberately, and fully. And that's wonderful to see someone able to do that. He knows exactly what he's doing and how to go about it.
Good art historian.
But it's a
Well,
fantastic book. I mean,
Yeah.
my God.
He's also showing a lot of relations in here to the real core, time-honored value of. I'm looking at an illustration by Michelangelo, but what he's saying is the graphic capabilities of Cosmo, touch on that sort of the core artistic skills that you had to have at the time. He's able to draw the human body and had it wasn't just abstraction, but it was
But
really
also,
based on.
at a later point, when you're in the very Renaissance, the very heart of the beast, so to speak, your own art, like that of Cosmo, can seem very common. Later, when someone else starts deconstructing what it took to have all that craft and skill and careful attention to detail, then they have a heightened awareness of what that required.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting to follow some of the descriptions I see as I'm going through the book here, that he's talking about some of the not just the work, the imaginary things that are going on, but the actual daily life of
Right.
this painter. What he's paying for his paints, how he's making his paints, his formulas in books, and the fact that he has to get funding from his patron and things of that nature. Just daily life.
That always fascinated me about the tools of the craft or art. With every art, there's the craft part of it, that it does get down to how much oil do you put in there, what was the nature of the color, in what ways do you mix that together. Would it stay that way? And if it didn't, what would affect it?
And some of these things were so exotic at the time. Blue, certain types of blue, or certainly gold, but reds. The very vibrancy of some of those paints were, you'd have to wait before you could get them, or they would be coming from foreign lands, and it would take a lot of commerce to actually get those materials. This is a beautiful book.
Then we have to
Great.
go to the more pedantic but honorable things.
Right,
Go ahead.
okay, I'll read this one out. Jeffrey Rosen. The Supreme Court, the personalities and rivalries that defined America.
Jeffrey Rosen has a whole edge about the Supreme Court and what's happening with it. He's a known commentator, and so I found this book interesting in that sense, especially since the Supreme Court has come more into prominence now because of some of its decisions on cases like the elections in Florida and abortion reform and affirmative action. And so with that comes much commentary. It still has refrained from allowing cameras, in the sessions.
Right, we can get recordings of the interrogations or whatever, the hearings.
But it's coming closer
Right.
and closer, and what's interesting is something that was a very, well, I wouldn't say secretive, but very, shall we say, set aside from public discourse, is being slowly drawn into public discourse in a very public way. So what it's doing is not just being recorded in legal journals and commentaries about the decisions it's rendering, but now it's starting to have a direct effect.
Yeah, it's interesting when you hear on NPR the live questioning by Justice Ginsburg, Scalia, Kennedy, whoever they are, of people making presentations, and in many cases they're much more, in my experience, they're much more contentious, challenging than you would imagine. You kind of imagine it being a sort of more rarefied atmosphere, but it's pretty down to earth.
And some of it's
very
very
practical.
pointed, and some of it can even be brutal.
Yeah, yeah. Now, as far as Jeffrey Rosen goes,
He has a more conservative kind of approach in legal terms. So he's concerned with the condition of the court and that there's some slippage there.
well, he's
He's quite
You
a
know,
close observer of it.
right. He's very what's the word? Pointed and astute as a commentator. He makes
Yeah.
that. He teaches at George Washington. He's a law professor,
Yeah.
but yet he's in the public, in a public medium.
But
in the
he
media.
himself bridges
So-
the same thing that's happening with the Supreme Court as it's edging over into the public discourse. People like him are starting to act as facilitators. Even as they criticize the Supreme Court, they're still bringing it over to deal with issues in what seems like a common debate on a daily basis. There are people concerned about this process because they argue this is short-sheeting the purpose of the Supreme Court and may even diminish it or mute its long-term view. But on the other hand, when you're making these kinds of arguments and these kinds of decisions, they have a direct impact. And people want to know what's going on and why the court acted that way. For example, the decision on affirmative action has caused universities, including the University of Michigan and others, to change their admissions policies forthright. People are trying to understand what's going on. There's challenges that are being, and there's some other challenges that are coming up now on different issues.
Right.
So
on that level, you have to take the trouble, or not the trouble, you have to take the time in a democratic sort of manner to be educated.
but
in
it
the
also
sense
opens
you
the
can
court.
listen.
It opens the court up to challenge.
Yeah, maybe
by
more
the public.
challenges than.
And I've
That's
heard
what I'm
comments,
saying.
yeah.
You can be aware. It's sort of, what is it called? A more open.
It's sort of a contentious process, but it's open to debate.
I wish the debate had been in the 2000 election. Where it had been.
Now this book, in terms of ethnicity, is a book that really is just wild. It's Everything is Separated by Water by Maria Magdalena Campos Pons, who's from post-revolutionary Cuba. I've used this in my own teaching because she uses text in her art, and it's a very interpretive, avant-garde style that she's got going, and again, it's a wonderful book. It's
Published by Yale again.
Yeah, another thing by Yale.
Well, I'm intrigued by the cover because the cover is very interesting. The woman is upside down with her hair flowing downwards, but it actually looks like almost her head might be in water. It
Right.
looks like something suspended, but it's reversed. So
Well,
it
and
has
there's
this
these
idea of
different
a
layers, and there's an image in there where with her with the dreads and a bird on top of her head.
Uh-huh.
It reminds me of that famous poem by Maya Angelou, "Why Does the Caged Bird Sing?" In Campos Pons art, you have the bird able to escape, but the woman is encased. And so there's, what you're saying is very true. There's all these complexities of image and concept and
Interesting.
paradigm.
Kind of like the Magritte painting.
Yeah.
Well, now this is called, there are two essays in here, one on Maria Magdalena Campos Pons, Everything is Separated by Water, the title of the book, but the other one is called The Diasporic Imagination, the Memory Works of Maria Magdalena Campos Pons.
And if you look in the back of the book, you'll see some of the plates, especially the really imaginative ones, and you can see what she's doing. I showed this book to some students, and one student said, "Don't take that book home." I think the student said this because some of the images are very unsettling. Some of them are evocative. Others are very delicate.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it is just plain disturbing,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but she's doing this juxtaposition of things. So it's fresh in that way, but it is, you know, unsettling, which I think is one of the roles
The roles of art,
yeah.
through its capabilities to make you feel.
Yeah.
So it seems like she's taking all manner of images, and it's not just limited to sort of a Cuban experience at all.
No.
This,
But if you put it in a
this-
diasporic thing, it's that the quality of being away from
Right.
home.
Well, this is very. This one's. I'm looking at one which is an outline of the. We've seen these drawings of the organization of people in the slave ships, the floor
Yeah.
plan, so to speak, of the people, called the Seven Powers Come by the Sea, which is quite just this sort of simple
Yes, simple things, but they're done very complexly.
to the limit.
But it's
It's
I
really
mean,
touching on memory and
Yeah.
loss, but honor at the same time.
And the diasporic dynamic is when you're away from home, then you're more vulnerable. You're more open. You've lost your so-called frame of reference. So now you're going to have to construct that. And that you're constructing may or may not be meaningful to you or even someone else. But that's all you have.
That's what you have.
And that certainly is this is the one about identity,
Mm-hmm.
but down here.
I am not here. Identity could be a tragedy.
Yeah, and it
the-
shows her picture. Shows her
Right.
picture with this phrase written on her body, and the last frame shows it vanishes.
Well, it's a washing out. Exactly. It's
Yeah.
slowly becoming from this historical photograph. I assume
Kind of a
it's a
sepia
historical
tone kind of thing.
right down to a washing out completely of that. It's very interesting. It's amazing how simple, especially with the text, the application of the text.
Here's this text, right on the body of a person, which in a way is demeaning, but informative at the same time. Then both the person and the text gradually, through the process of technology, is obliterated. And I would think that for a diasporic person, that's precisely what happens after a while. I've had people who will tell me that when they're away from their homeland, they start even losing words.
People tell me the same thing. Vanishing. I mean, I've experienced that.
And along
From the
with
other
it-
point of, the
Yeah.
other, when you're in a world where people do not speak English or, Americanized English,
Yeah.
and you start to have to
But along with
think
it, they
that way.
lose memories. So thank you for being on Rip Rap.
It's always great to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome.